The weekly message of the United Church of Christ of Homelstown, Pennsylvania, a podcast version of our worship service. To learn more and listen to the rest of the worship, check us out online at homelstownucc.org.
On this palm, or rather cloak, Sunday, I start this sermon as we began this morning, and we highlight that which we know and what we think we know about a story so often told. Much like the Christmas story, which is usually a melding together of the two different birth narratives, the Palm Sunday story is also one we might hang on to a few bits here and there from each version. Luke's version is rather sparse, it's true. It skips the donkey's inclusion from Matthew, and, as we've said, the palms from the other versions. Yet it does lovingly tie itself directly back to a song of triumphal entry in our Palm Sunday psalm. In fact, the same psalm as Easter and Palm Sunday every year in the lectionary, making it one of the most commonly included passages. Interesting, right? It constantly returns and returns to center us on the cornerstone New Testament writers saw fulfilled in Jesus' entry to Jerusalem, in the expectation that the long-awaited powerful man of the people will change everything for the in-crowd as they throw down everything they have at his feet. It is public worship. It's a parade. It's performative. But what happens next? In the temple worship included with the psalm, there's a veneration happening of the covenant made with Moses, but also of the temple of Solomon, to the reign of kings and a feeling of safety with the strong man in charge. Jesus, however, doesn't allow the people to hold him tied to that style of religion. He allows the allusion to the temple, but also confuses the cynics and speaks of stones cheering the celebration. Stone, stone, stone. Maybe a tie back to the ancestral stone altars built in the pre-Moses stories. Maybe an allusion to the impossibility of God acting and living in this world. Maybe a foreshadowing of other stony moments to come. Jesus is consistently shown in Luke as someone who breaks purity codes to return believers to the foundation of the covenant founded in Abraham, where all the peoples of the earth, not just those who could keep the rituals, will be blessed through Israel's covenant. As one commentator has written in speaking of stones himself, Jesus in Luke may be alluding to Habakkuk chapter 2, where the stones will cry out demanding divine justice when the wicked have devised shame for their house by cutting off all the peoples. It's no coincidence that one of the first things Jesus does post-parade is cleanse the temple, because its economics marginalize the poor. The reign of Christ requires the inclusion of all people in the economy of God, a commonwealth of the divine inheritance. Torah, written on stone. Epiphanies, remembered with memorial stones. Buildings of stones, planet of stone, but also to those who would stop others from throwing stones. In all of it, there is a spiral, cyclical nature to the stories. Themes of covenant and sacrifice weave in and out. They're out of order, but maybe we're to see them as just touch points for those in the know, to contemplate once again how this week is meant to focus us. If we read it in order, we would have palms, and we would have meal, and we would have garden. But today, we have palms, and then garden, and then meal, and then all the way back to the psalm. Begin with celebration, with the throwing of the coats into the street and borrowing young horses from neighbors, throwing a counter-protest to the ritualized way their government sought to control the masses. Move through all the feels, fulfillment and sorrow and anger and pain, and return in 1 week to an even higher level of celebration. A week to see how our experience of the world compares to the way of God. God who loved and lived and showed us a way beyond both. But our lectionary offerings this morning also include that out-of-place moment in the garden. It does feel out of place, and I pondered on that this week, as I hope you might have been too, going from our processional Hosanna, the loud children sang, back to the oddity of this praying with disciples who fall asleep, and then back to processional wording with our psalm. It's out of order. But maybe that in itself can be a touch point for us this day, of living in a disjointed world, with a faith that meets us in the disjointedness. Disciples who are so ready to follow Jesus' lead in the parade that they give him an untested conveyance. They change the words to a known hymn and call him King. They parade to the temple with him, trusting his every work and action. And yet, when he asks them to pray, they fall asleep. When the world is falling down onto his shoulders, when the fear and the hope creep in, these followers are no longer following. And still, he makes a way for them. For the early church, Jesus was seen as this triumphant victor returning from a battle with evil, going into the temple, making intercession, offering himself as sacrifice so that God's mercy could flow to God's people. Yet this peace, this mercy, is not built upon military maneuvers. It isn't created by making one group of people feel insecure or unloved or less valued. It's created by disciples being awoken to knowing their worth, their divine blessedness, and their place in the communal work to come. This last week, a book on my shelf drew my eye, and I went back to reread it. It's a pretty short book, honestly, written by the visionary author Ursula K. Le Guin, called The Lathe of Heaven. The premise is that an individual man, set in Portland, Oregon, has the power to change the world in his sleep by dreaming. This sounds too good to be true in some ways. To be able to eliminate racism, war, to get a better job just by dreaming it, right? But the power is subverted by the doctor he turns to for help. And as I played with the story this week, thinking about Palm Sunday and Holy Week and Easter to come, and all of these stages of the Christian faith that we condense down to bite-sized theologies and pack them into one 7-day period, I came across this one quote. To be God, you have to know what you're doing. And to do any good at all, just believing you're right and your motives are good isn't enough. You have to be in touch. Dr. Haber isn't in touch. No one else, no thing even, has an existence of its own for him. He sees the world as a means to an end. It doesn't matter and doesn't make any difference if his end is good. Means is all we've got. He can't accept. He can't let be. He can't let go. He could take us all with him, out of touch, if he did manage to dream as I do. What am I to do? The protagonist asks. What would any of us do if confronted with powers so magical? What would we do if we knew the fate of millions of people landed on our shoulders? What would we do if we knew the world was desperately in need of your attention? Hopefully, bolstered by our stories of our faith, we would rise to the challenge. To see people for who they are, to fight for what's right, to make the way that is built on Jesus' divine way. The foundations of our faith, the stones upon which we build our lives, are made with the letting go, the cultivation, the being in touch with the world that the book finds through the story. That's where all this begins and where it ends. The cycle continues. We find our touch points. We reach out to find out how to get by with a little help from our friends. Jesus' way offended people because otherwise he would not have been crucified. Luke portrays Jesus with an attitude of audacity. Power, yet wielded for us. Only those with power can willingly give it up. And this is the biggest test of our lives. Trusting in those who seek not power or prestige, but who look for the humble and the humility of Christ. Starting all the way back to the origin story of Luke, Mary, the mother of Jesus, sings in her Magnificat of the upside-down nature of the arrogant, powerful, and the returning to God's order. So as we near the end of this life story again, we're reminded that power can be accepted as Jesus accepts in the street protest of Jerusalem, that the willingness to give it up must also be there as in the garden of prayer. Though suffering may happen to each person in life, everyone triumphs who follows Christ, who lives within the peace, the shalom, salam of God's justice, harmony, and wholeness. The cycle turns again. The wheel of time moves with us. We search and find and celebrate and grieve and shout and always find strength in the struggle. So let that be the call this week, friends. Amen.
This has been the weekly worship from the United Church of Christ of Hummelstown. No matter who you are, or where you are, on life's journey, you are welcome here. Join us online or in person, at 104 East Main Street in Hummelstown, Sundays at 10:30 a.m. Thank you for listening today. We look forward to your fellowship.